multilingual content, support for courses that are paid for. This came from Nixty, who does OER and also paid for services on their website. Open and closed area. This is for this came from Moodle. Offline authoring, accessibility tracking, control of licensing at the asset level, marking up content as different sorts of assets. This is important for creating metadata also. Creation of web links, allowance for upload, custom homepage, editing, and disclaimer on submission. So these are some of the criteria that we said were important to have in the workflow of the CMS. And then there was user management section, which the developers wanted to see user profiles, the groups, and customizable taxonomies of the contents. And now learner tools. Now, when I was going through the different CMSs before, starting from EduCommons, I did not mention anything about learners' needs or assessments. So now we are, the OpenCourseWare projects are in a phase where collaboration is very important, assessment is very important. So the team of developers who got together thought that learner tools were very important, such as integrated discussion forums, tagging and keywords, search function, other interactive activities, personalized space, ratings and reviews of courses from other users, learning pathways or other recommendation service, having an e-portfolio, contextual help, other collaborative activities, peer support, knowledge mapping, learning journals, activity records, metadata export, social bookmarking, and widgets. So these are some of the criteria that developers wanted to see in a CMS. And these are some of the things that the developers wanted to see in an assessment tool within the platform. And they were assessment engine, grading, certification, and self-assessment exercises. So the reason I decided to have a talk on platforms is not because I wanted to show you this is the best platform, you should go with this, but rather looking at the choices of platform used in the past 10 years or so shows you what has been important in OER or OCW for the project leaders. In the beginning, it was all about just getting your contents up there, showing what you're doing in your classrooms. Now, it's about how to utilize those contents so that you can make something out of it, so that you can achieve that learning. And that is why we have so much needs on the learning and assessment tools. Now, whereas in 2007, many of our members were on the same platform, now pretty much everybody is using a different platform. Many are developing their own platform, and some are so different that other institutions cannot ask to use that platform. For example, we've got OpenStudy, which is a social networking-based platform that uses OpenCourseWare. And Korea University from South Korea is developing what is called Currica, which is a peer tutoring system based on OER. So now the community is using different platforms, and it really shows the diversity with the projects. Now, again, the PowerPoint slides and everything, they will be made available to you. This is where you can see the comparison chart based on the criteria that I had just mentioned. You can see different, Moodle, EduCommons, Drupal, to see whether they fit those criteria or not. Okay, so So to show appreciation to our supporters, I usually have this slide at the very end. Activities of the OpenCourseware Consortium are generously supported by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and the sustaining members of the consortium. Now, if you have any questions, this is where you can write feedback@ or mina@ocwconsortium.org. You can follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook so that you can keep up with what we are doing. If we have any new projects or new interesting projects to showcase, I usually put them on our social networking sites. So I'll finish my presentation here, and
thank you.
I'll wait for the questions later.
Thank you, Mina, for the nice presentation and being on very much on time. The next presenter is Katie DeHart from UNISA. She is going to make a presentation on strategy on OER in our university.
Fellow delegates, and I also just want to repeat what Karina said and thank you all for the warm welcome that we've received after traveling such a long way from South Africa, from all the organizers. It's been most encouraging, and I certainly won't go back to South Africa and say I've been in a small fishing village. Your island is a bit more than that. Just to give you a bit of background before I start my presentation, my colleague and I that wrote this paper are both involved in the College of Economic and Management Sciences in rolling out the tuition policies and making sure that the practice of the policies takes place in our college. OER is a fairly new concept in our university, and that is why we decided to have a look at the overview on where UNISA actually stands as the biggest open distance learning institution in the Southern Hemisphere and one of the mega universities in the world. So I share that overview with you. It's really just a sharing of where we're at. And listening to Karina speak now and listening to the speaker on the platforms, I see we share the same issues, and it was a concern of mine that how am I going to add anything to the Asia debate coming from South Africa? But we're all in the same place and we're all on the same journey, and our issues are your issues as well. So just to give you a bit of background on UNISA, in 2004, three higher education institutions in South Africa, what we refer to as the old UNISA, which was a distance learning institution, the distance leg of Vista University and Technikon South Africa were merged to form UNISA as we know it today, and that gave us South Africa's only dedicated distance education university. Our vision and mission is towards the African university in the service of humanity. So already where UNISA places itself, already the idea of OER and the sharing of resources in Africa comes in through the positioning of the university. The merger provided UNISA with the impetus to examine its role in society and to see how we were going to impact on South Africa and beyond. And UNISA is a comprehensive university, so we offer both vocational and academic qualifications. And it's been important for us since the merger to have a look at where the university is going. Not only the background of UNISA, but we need to look at the South African education environment to see how the use of OERs can be used and the contribution towards them. With the growth and development of technology and education, it enables UNISA within the South African environment not only to be an ODL, but an ODEL institution where we are busy embracing e-learning and in the process of going fully online. The latest draft policy framework on distance education, it's still a draft policy from the government, mentions that South Africa is going to, in the future, have a shortage of academics but also burgeoning numbers of students looking for higher education. So definitely the environment in which we find ourselves in education means that we're going to have to make use of other resources and not just rely on what we have at present. Okay, so let's have a look at UNISA and OERs, and we decided to have a look at a couple of aspects just to give us an idea of where UNISA found itself. First of all, we had a look at policies and official documents, and I'll share further with you on each one of these topics. We also looked at the contributions by UNISA academics to OER, what's happening in practice, because policies don't always tell the true picture. It's not, there might be policies, but they might not be actually being used or applied in practice. We also had a look at web presence, for example, repositories and such likes, and then other expressions by the university to show where the university stood and where it was going towards. Okay, so if we have a look at the policies of the university, since 2010, there are 4 policies that have been brought out which specifically mention OER in the policies. So that was encouraging that the university is actually referring to the use of open educational resources. I'll show you a trajectory just now of UNISA from management level, and you'll see that since 2007 that UNISA has been looking at contributing and using OER. So since 2010 there have been 4 policies. Unfortunately, 21 out of the 27, we had a look at the teaching and learning policy. So we didn't look at all the policies in the university, but 21 of the 27 that were reviewed disregarded facets of OER. So it left a gap where actually the university could rewrite those policies and include OER perspectives. And unfortunately, even worse than that, some of the policies hampered the development, the adoption of OER. And from looking at this, it's our recommendation that a lot of the policies will need to be revisited, especially copyright of our study material. But you'll see that the university is positioning itself in the OER field on the journey, so those should be changed in the near future. So this is the trajectory that I was talking about. UNISA started exploring OERs in 2007 and then really brought it together with a 3-phase study where they interviewed academic support teams and students in 2011. DISA is our Directorate of Institutional Statistical Analysis, and they had a look at and explored the feelings around OER's perceptions, whether people knew about it, like Karina's study looked at. In 2012, in March this year, there was a OER strategy workshop where community participants from UNISA were invited to participate, and that led to the development of a OER task team. So I think from here things are really going to start moving quickly. Again, with the green paper that I mentioned by the government talks about funding available for creating OERs, and it puts it in UNISA's hands as the only distance educator in the country. And then the OER World Congress, and beyond 2012 is UNISA is busy working, and I know they're busy drafting a OER strategy. So we're on the road towards that. Okay, so then we looked at contributions and practice, and here I come to something closer to my heart because it's happening in our college. Some of my colleagues in the Department of Economics make use of a YouTube channel where you can see there, I don't know if 248 uploaded videos that they've recorded on aspects of the economics syllabus. They say, where it says about it on YouTube, this is an initiative of the Department of Economics at the University of South Africa to provide teachers and learners of economics with teaching and learning resources. And if you go into their web page, it's still in the baby phases, but they have teaching and learning resources that they've made available for teachers and students of economics. So we can see that there are contributions towards OER. I think where UNISA's lacking more is the use of it. So not only do we have Econ Tutor, there's also a couple of other open courses available through UNISA website, Life Consumer Sciences, Household Food Security, and also Learn to Speak an African Language. I hear Asia talking about the problem of languages. We have 11 official languages. We teach in only 2 of them at this stage. And then there's a course in ethics and accounting that's also going to be incorporated into some of our short learning programs. And then I just want to speak to you about SAT. This is a new initiative, and it's very close to my heart because myself and a couple of colleagues from our department actually founded this association. It's the South African Tax Educators Association. We have got together, we have a professional body that accredits our qualifications for chartered accountants, and we've got together, I think it's a first in South Africa, all the SAICA accredited universities, the tax lecturers have got together and formed a collaborative unit. So instead of being in competition with each other, we meet quarterly. And it started off as a research initiative because accountants aren't really known for research. We are babies when it comes to master's and doctoral programs. And so we wanted to support each other in research, but we've actually formed a tuition leg, which I head up, and we have got YouTube channels from next year where we're going to share podcasts that we can use each other's students, because tax is unique. It changes every year with legislation, and it's only limited to South Africa, so we battle to find OERs. Okay, UNISA, OERs and the web. We have a newly launched web page, UNISA Open, where we have a repository of all publications and courseware available, where we teach academics about OERs. And then the other expressions. UNISA is one of the anchor partners, founding anchor partners in OERU. That we've signed, our Vice Chancellor signed the Berlin Declaration and also the Paris OER. Both our Vice Chancellor and Pro-Vice Chancellor are very positive. In fact, we have to report back to the Pro-Vice Chancellor on what's happening in Asia as soon as we get back from the symposium, so that UNISA can take into account anything that we've learned here. And then more recently we had an open distance learning conference where many of the keynote addresses and the pre-conference workshop was on OERs. So it was communicating it to our academics. The indications from, if you can call it research, our overview or survey of UNISA are that UNISA is committed to the OER movement by both using and contributing to OERs. We want to be a conduit through which Africa, because we have the infrastructure through which we can spread education throughout Africa, but it's not without the challenges, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But as an institution, it looks like UNISA is ready to embrace these challenges and to move forward. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Katie. The next presenter is Oswar Nur Mohammad Hasim from Queensland University. He's doing his research work, and he will make his presentation on enabling access to and reuse of publicly funded research data as open educational resources. I think it's a very interesting area. I look forward to your presentation.
Sanjaya, fellow presenters and member of delegates, very well good morning and assalamu alaikum to everyone. This presentation is based on a paper submitted to the OER symposium. The objective of the paper is to develop a policy framework enabling access to and reuse of research data as a legal strategy to overcome the challenges in data access and reuse. This paper was co-written by Professor Anne Fitzgerald and me. Prof. Anne Fitzgerald is my PhD supervisor. I'm a PhD student from Malaysia, so this is sort of a homecoming for me. Unfortunately, Prof. Anne Fitzgerald cannot make it here, so here I'm going to talk about what we have written. We have received specific reminder from Prof. Menon not to talk so much about the concept of OER and sort of that, because those who are attending here have sort of a pre-knowledge, they're quite advanced in terms of OER. So I'm going to skip that part. I'm not going to talk about what is OER, what is research data. Instead, I'm going to jump to talk about how should a legal strategy overcoming data access and reuse framework be developed. Therefore, we are coming with a strategy recommendation. This is a simple strategy recommendations. It is to develop a policy enabling access to and reuse of publicly funded research data as open educational resources. So the main recommendations of this policy is to develop a policy instrument not based on a declaratory or aspiration policy, but to use the policy as an action and regulatory policy which mandates self-archiving of publicly funded research data. And the standard to be adopted by the policy framework that we would like to introduce is based on the international standard currently adopted by the OECD as well as the Research Council of the United Kingdom. And in these recommendations, we are going to have the basic components of the policy. Whatever there is, we should be familiar with the policy, the contents of the policy, the procedures and the guidelines. And the criteria of the policy to be developed is based on 4 criteria. There is clarity, simplicity, fair, and compliance with law. And the policy making process, we would like to recommend it to be a bottom-up approach to be undertaken by institutions offering the open educational resources, simply because in most countries, especially in Asia and developing countries, there is so far not a single policy which enable publicly funded research data as open educational resources. So these 7 main recommendations become a starting point for the development of the policy. Based on the main recommendation, the policy is to be developed in 3 parts, comprising of the basic components, procedures, and guidelines. Into the first part, there is the basic components of the policy. There are basically 11 basic components of the policy, starting from the title, going to the policy background up to the references. The blue color means there are hyperlinks there. So since it is only 20 minutes time allocated, I'm not going to go one by one. It will take time, so but I'm happy to take up answers, to take up questions at the later stage of this presentation. The procedures of the policy, which is the second part of our recommendation, we spread the recommendation into 2 sections. The first one is about the general recommendation, whereas as a general recommendation, the procedures of the policy is to be applied to all research data which are covered by the policy, i.e. the publicly funded research data, and the compliance is mandatory in accordance to the main recommendation. failure to comply with the policy shall result the researcher or those who receive the public fund to be subjected to internal proceeding either by the public research institution where the researcher is attached or by the public research funding agencies. So it's quite harsh, but this is a policy framework and regulatory and action policy, so it's sort of like that. It could be expected like that. And next we go to the specific recommendation. There are 4 procedures that we would like to recommend in order for this policy to work well. The first one is a procedure regulating the data release to enable research data which are publicly funded to be released free of charge and accessible and user-friendly. And the second one is we would like to propose a procedure which will ensure that the security of the research participants and also the data subjects to be intact, as well as to look into the possibility of regulating the confidentiality and also the national security, because publicly funded research data is diverse, which means that the contents could be very well involve a private or confidential matter, and it needs to be regulated. And the third procedure that we would like to propose is the so-called data retention and preservation procedure, in order to ensure that these data could be used for future access by future data users. And finally, we would like to introduce the so-called data documentation procedure. It's about governing a metadata, information about data. The purpose of having this kind of procedure is so that the quality as well as the location of the data could be well located by any potential data users. So it's in blue, so there are hyperlinks there. I can show you the procedures anytime if there is any interest in that. And finally, we are going to the core of this presentation, which is the guidelines as a strategy to overcome the legal challenges to access and reuse of research data as open educational resources. In this context, the legal challenges have been defined as the presence or the existence or inexistence of any legal rights or duty which has the effect of restricting, hindering, or becoming a constraint or obstacle to access and reuse of open educational resources. In developing these guidelines, we have a perception of developing the guideline as a best practice. So in order to get the best practice, we have to refer to several guidelines and procedures currently available, not directly about the open educational resources, but about access and reuse of data in general. So we sort of alter and modify the policy and also mix it with other existing literatures in order to come up with the best practices. So altogether we have 11 best practices to resolve the legal challenges, and the legal the recommendations are as below. The first one is guidelines to deal with the research data protected as intellectual property, even though data as a raw material normally not protected as a copyright. However, when it is being compiled or when it exists as a database, then intellectual property protection could be there. And in European countries, ever since the introduction of database rights, it means that data sets and databanks are also protected as copyright. So it means that in order to overcome the legal challenges, this intellectual property right in research data need to be governed and need to be released. And the second one is in terms of ownership of publicly funded research data. Regardless whether the research data is being protected as a copyright or database right, or not protected at all, there must be some proprietorship over the research data. So the guidelines here is to ensure that the ownership of research data, if possible, falls or vested in the public research institutions so that it will be easier for a policy framework to operate. And if not, it should be vested in the researcher, but the researcher should have a responsibility to release back to the public as an open educational materials. And the third one is the guidelines on data exclusivity. It means that researchers who conducted research laboriously for 3 or 4 years would like to have certain aspect of exclusivity. We are not going to deny them the exclusivity, they could have it, but within a limited framework. So the guideline would suggest that after a year or two, after the data has been fully utilized exclusively by the data creator, has to be released back as in open educational materials. And the fourth one, in terms of the legitimate use of research data, in each and every country, there will be a copyright law and database law which will define what is the scope of legitimate use allowed. And mostly it's about private use or for educational purposes. Other than that, it is not allowed. Not so many jurisdictions aware that research data is actually protected as a copyright or database right. In that sense, we would like this research data to be licensed the way other open content materials are licensed. So that would mean that it should be licensed as a Creative Commons license, if possible through a CC by attribution license. And I read over there, and it seems that Wawasan Open University also have the same policy and principle. So the next one is on moral rights of data creator. Moral rights is very tricky because it is a personal right which is distinct and separate from the exclusive right. The exclusive right falls on the data owner, but the moral right falls on the data creator, regardless whether the data creator is the owner of the research data or not. So there will be a parallel right that could govern the access and reuse of research data, one by data owner, the other one is by the data creator. In order to overcome these legal challenges, we would like to introduce the so-called governance of moral rights. There are certain aspects of, there are certain category of data, especially which are not non-creative in nature or which are produced using public fund, that should not be, where the moral rights should not be allowed to overcome access and reuse of research data by potential data users. And the next one is on confidentiality of research data and privacy of research data. These two legal challenges can be overcome by introducing a data release procedure which first protect the confidential data, and the second one is protect the informational privacy of research participants and data subjects by way of either legal, statistical, or also data redaction techniques. And all these guidelines are in hyperlinks, so it means that the content is at the back. I just need to have a click if there is any people interested to know about it. And classified research data is research data which disclosure will be prejudicial to the security and interest of the country or a particular nation, given the fact that research data, especially which is publicly funded, could mean that there are research data which is about the defense or about chemical weapon and whatsoever. The breadth and the width of the research should not be underestimated. So there are research data which, if disclosed, could be prejudicial to the national interest and security. And with that, we would like to introduce a guidelines whereby all data should be classified, whether it should be released, should not be released. If shouldn't be released, how access can be used, access and reuse can be given, and how should it be regulated so that the interest of the nation can be taken care of and protected. And the next one is research data by an invention. It is also a legal challenge because if you want to file a patent for your invention, you must make sure that you should not leak or disclose the data ahead of your patent filing. It means that premature disclosure should not be allowed. In that sense, we could see that most of research data whereby there is a potential for patent and commercialization, there will be sort of data, the data will be withheld and not to be disclosed until several years. So in that sense, we would like to propose a guidelines whereby all these data about an invention, whilst not prejudicing or discriminating the inventor's right to file the patent, at the same time we want to make sure that these data about invention to a certain extent or some point must be released as open educational resources. And finally, data providers' duty to ensure data quality. I noticed now someone was asking about data about quality, but this one I'm talking about data quality, and the answer given by Dr. Sanjaya that part of quality is about fitness for purpose. So in these guidelines that we provide, we also develop a standard of procedure whereby the quality of the data which will be provided as open educational resources, the quality assurance practice to be observed, and the duty to ensure the quality of these research data materials are to be held or to be carried out by the data providers, which are the researchers themselves or the research institutions which become the employee or the data owners. So basically, all these are the components and practice and guidelines. Further strategies is very much dependent in the territorial context of this particular country or nation. Since this is a symposium about OER in Asia and I'm from Malaysia, I would like to comment further strategies from the perspective or viewpoint of Malaysia. In complement to this, in addition to the policy framework that we would like to, we recommended just now, there are 3 others further strategies that can be adopted depending on the suitability in each and a particular country. As far as Malaysia is concerned, further strategies is to amend the existing policies of Malaysian public research institutions. The reason being, the existing policies